Good evening, Det 150. I'm Cadet Connor Carroll, and this week, in order to prep for a very difficult lead lab in a very difficult classroom scenario, I briefed my flight on troop leading procedures. And per the request of a couple other cadets, both in my flight and outside of my flight, I decided to make this video covering my slides that were already posted in Teams, but really covering the Air Force's outline for how exactly you're meant to conduct these kind of scenarios, these classroom scenarios, these GLPs, AEF scenarios. The principles that I'm about to teach you in these slides all apply. I myself didn't actually make them originally. They were originally made by Captain Rich, a past cadre member of Det 150, so I can't take complete credit. I really just expanded on his past work, added my own style, my own flair to it, and of a little bit extra slides and a little extra tidbits of information that I think I've picked up along the way. But I hope some of you at the very least find this useful, and hopefully it'll stick around for at least a couple of years. So the first two things that we want to cover for the day are the cognitive lesson objectives and the cognitive samples of behavior. So essentially what exactly I want you to get out of watching this video and how exactly I want you to be able to display it. Troop leading procedures are a principle that is rarely ever taught. It's probably covered once a year. And I think that's a shame. I think it needs to be talked about substantially more so you guys have actual guidance. But the cognitive lesson objective is to remember the fundamentals of troop leading procedures, and your cognitive sample of behavior is to be able to understand it and actually apply it if you're thrown into a leadership position in scenario. The first thing of substantial importance that we're going to cover is your Form 2. Form 2 is essentially how you're evaluated and what we're looking for from a leader in scenario. It's your eval sheet. It's literally for you guys the answers to the test, right? Nobody ever looks at the Form 2 before their first scenario, so they walk in blind. This covers everything we're either going to dock you for or elevate you for whenever we're grading you on these kind of projects. Your subsections and your sections are professionalism, communication, warfighting, leadership, and mission execution. Your max score is 5 and your minimum score is -5. With each of these subsections, you can only score within each. For example, for professionalism itself, the max you can score in the whole subsection is 1. You can either get a -1, a 0, or a +1. It's hard to explain, and in fact, Form 2 is so important that it could be its own briefing worth about an hour, but we don't have time for that for this purposes. Just know that the section and the subsections outline the behavior that we want to see from you guys. Other than that, you have only one other really important piece of this form, and that's the leaders of character section, right? If you fail any of these different aspects of the leaders of character subsection, then you failed the entire Form 2. For example, you have living honorably, lifting others, and elevating performance. Just a specific example of how you can fail each of these situations. You're living honorably. For example, my sophomore year. The first semester of my sophomore year, I intentionally pretended to blow myself up in a mine. There was a specific scenario that involved mines and fake mines crawling through a minefield, and you'll see those as you get along, but I intentionally blew myself up in one of these scenarios, and that's not living honorably. It's not following the rules of the situation, and I got failed for it because of that. Lifting others, if you demean or talk down to any members of your team or bash them in any way, harsh language, that's an easy way to fail. You're lifting others. And finally, elevating performance is essentially being so bad in the scenario that they probably would have done better without you. You'd have to hurt the team's progress yourself if you failed the elevating performance section. That's mostly everything we have to cover regarding your Form 2. Now let's get into the specifics of what troop leading procedures actually are. Troop leading procedures are essentially the method that you use when leading a small group through any kind of little problem, any kind of challenge. The best example is some of y'all saw the classroom scenario that we did last week at Lead Lab. Troop leading procedures would be a method for you to lead a small group to accomplish the tasks given to you in an MTO or in a prompt for a problem, any kind of situation. But all of these principles in here can be used and applied to any general life problem that isn't limited to the functionality of these methods that I'm about to teach you aren't limited to GLPs. You can use them for any large scale problem or situation that you face, for the most part at least. But essentially, this is the Air Force's method and outline, an 8-step process that covers how to go about receiving plans and executing a mission. A wise cadet once told me that the leader of the scenario, their main goal isn't actually to solve the problem themselves. His position in his role in said situation is more so to be the facilitator of the mission. It's not to solve the problem himself, it's to get his team and his staff to solve the problem for him. But essentially, I want you to not think of yourself as the worker bee. I want you to think of yourself as the queen. You're organizing your people more so than you're actually doing the work in the project itself. But 8 steps, again, depending on the situation, it might not always be the most practical. If you're given 10 minutes, then you might not want to go over each step individually. It's a little bit less productive, but during specifically large scale or medium scale scenarios, so anything from 30 minutes up, this process is very effective and proved to be very effective for me in the past. But essentially, you're going to receive a mission, issue a warning order, make a tentative plan, initiate movement, conduct reconnaissance, complete your plan, issue the complete order, and supervise and refine. We're going to go into fine details momentarily. But we're going to use this to outline both what is ideal and what typically goes wrong for you guys in these kind of projects. Here's a little graphic, a little visual for you for your viewing pleasure, and it actually covers a couple little principles that we won't exactly talk about, but it's a good overview of the process, and it's a good kind of visual for the steps to how exactly I want you to conduct troop leading procedures. Okay, we're going to get right into the first 3 steps of our process, but the first step is to receive the mission. In an ideal world, once given the mission, the leader would take mere moments to understand the objective, the full intricate details of the prompt, your ROEs of the situation, your goals, your resource limitation. They'd fully understand it off the rip and be able to brief your team and issue your warning order with complete confidence in their understanding of the prompt. But we typically don't let that happen at all. So whenever a leader is picked for a scenario in this kind of situation, they're usually just picked out of a group and handed a prompt with way too much information to process within mere moments, and they can't have full understanding before they brief their team. So what I do is I'd work the full understanding of the prompt into your second step of the process, which is issuing your warning order and briefing your team. So if I was given a prompt and I sat there and read it for the first 2 minutes of a scenario, if I didn't address my people at all and was just reading the fine print on an MTO, then it wouldn't be an effective use of my time. It wouldn't be efficient and be a great way to get docked points on your Form 2. So what you should do is you should work that into the second step. So while you're briefing your team, you're learning as much as you can about the process itself. So you're acting as a sponge. While you're reading it to your team, you're learning as much yourself as you possibly can in order to actually make a tentative plan and do your third step. But the team during your warning order and your brief should be asking questions to fully understand the prompt, both for you and for the group in and of itself. So if people ask clarifying questions, then you'll have to be forced to read finer print and finer details in order to understand the fine details of the prompt. So everybody is on the same page and everybody actually understands the situation, and both you and the group is learning. Next, you're going to get into your tentative plan. This is your brainstorming step of the process. You're supposed to act within an allotted time period. So we'll give you, say, you'll have 2 minutes, or you'll be given 5 minutes for planning and 10 minutes for execution. Those 5 minutes are allotted to planning in particular. You can do this as one big group, or you can split your group and delegate as you wish. You can split them into separate groups as long as they reconvene, and at the end of it, your leader makes a clear and public decision on one course of action. So once again, you can split the group, you can brainstorm in separate groups however you wish, but the leader at the end needs to make the choice towards which decision and which plan that, say, both groups give you a different course of action and a different plan. The leader is the one making a clear and public decision at the very end on which course of action they need to take. And this, once again, all needs to happen within your allotted time period for planning. Okay. Continuing on, your next step is to initiate movement. So essentially your team starts working, and they're working both as quickly and efficiently as possible throughout the whole process so you can get as much done. Everybody needs to know two things: what they're doing and when to be doing it. For example, you don't want to delegate a task to a certain team, a certain small group of people, and to not give them any time limits or time constraints. That shows that you're not controlling your groups and you don't have control over the situation or the team that's present. So if I'm assigning a certain group to do a certain task, I need it done by 4 minutes, and then the fifth minute is your leader coming to me and giving me updated progress on how exactly you're doing. You need what you're doing, what exactly they're doing, and when they're doing it, and when to be done with it. Next, you're going to conduct reconnaissance. This is simply your leader looking ahead 1 to 2 steps in the plan and the process in order to watch the system set in place to almost hone and conduct the next step, which is completing the plan. Rule of law: no plan survives first contact with the enemy. No POC or no cadre member is ever going to let you go through a whole plan and a whole scenario without any problems. It just won't happen. It'll just never happen. I promise you. I've been doing this for 2 years and never seen it once. But essentially, when completing the plan and when conducting the reconnaissance, you're essentially just refining the process and making changes so that your team is working more efficiently. So, for example, if you noticed one group is struggling in particular, you're in control of multiple groups, you can pull 2 or 3 people from the one that's ahead of the curve and kicking butt, and you can pull them from that group and say, hey, go work in this one. Just little changes like that and tweaks to the plan that help your group be more efficient and more productive and do better in general in the situation. But finally, you're going to issue your complete plan or your upward. This can be public. You can stop the groups if you want. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but it's publicly confirming the course of action that your team's going to take. There's no major changes. These major changes happened. We missed this information, etc. Those kinds of little details, and just clarifying it with your group so everybody knows exactly what they're doing and what changed from the start, at the very start of the situation. You want to take into account SMEAC, which is your situation, your mission, your execution, your admin and logistics, and your command system. You want to get all those fine details. Before we hit step 8, just for complete clarity, steps 4 through 7 can happen at any order and however many times throughout the course of the project. So for example, I could issue in my scenario a complete plan, a complete op board, but I get an inject 5 minutes later that completely changes everything, and mixes up the plan that I had set in place, so we'll have to do the steps, the process again. But once again, just don't get too firm in your idea of the steps because 4 through 7 happen in any order and probably multiple times throughout the course of the scenario and project. But finally, you supervise and refine. This is essentially throughout the course of the entire experiment. This and from the planning process up, you're continuously supervising and refining in order to not get caught up in the nitty-gritty and the fine details of the work. You want to be managing the overall and making sure everybody else is doing their job. You don't want to get too caught up in the fine details of the project, and we'll talk about why that's problematic momentarily. Okay, now just as importantly and more interestingly in my eyes, we're going to cover what typically goes wrong, which is typically what actually happens in your scenario. But first, when receiving the mission, the leader tries too hard to fully understand the prompt. He tries to solve it in his own head before actually giving it to the team to actually work on. So more often than not, when somebody is handed an MTO, they sit there, they read it, and they freeze. That's probably the worst thing that could possibly happen to a group. And sitting and reading every word of the prompt is the worst use of your time. I promise you, you're not going to be able to figure out all that yourself. So once again, you should probably think about reading it to everybody else and learning throughout the process of reading it to everybody else. But next, with issuing a warning order, what typically goes wrong is they don't do this step and the next step before taking action. But when briefing your team, essentially they don't fully understand the process and they don't take into account your people, your items, your time. You fail to manage your resources. You get dock points for that on your Form 2. But the team doesn't understand and begins working anyways and doesn't actually ask any clarifying questions, so they just get penalties for not following the ROEs of the situation. Right. Next, specifically with people, items, and time, for people, half your team doesn't actually work or doesn't actually do anything valuable. So when discussing how exactly the leader doesn't consider, for a practical example of each of the following situations, for people, you'd fail to manage your resources regarding people by not actually putting everybody to work and only using half your team. For items itself, you fail to consider key items in the puzzle. For example, if you leave a radio sitting on the table that has something specifically to do with how to solve the problem and you just never touch it, that's failing to manage your items. And finally, your time, your team and you move too slow that nothing actually gets done. So you want to manage all three and utilize your resources of people, items, and time throughout the process. That's one of the easiest ways to get docked points on your Form 2 and to hurt your team overall. But next, you're making a tentative plan. When making a tentative plan, you fail to consider once again, your people, items, and your time. And there's typically, more often than not in these kinds of situations, too many cooks in the kitchens, meaning essentially too many people trying to get their inputs and give their opinion and give this information without actually considering the fact that the leader might be stressed or might be trying to comprehend it all. Too many different people trying to give their opinion only hurts the cohesion of the group, and it doesn't actually necessarily help. And we'll talk about how to navigate that momentarily. But there's also a lot of parrots, meaning a lot of people typically like to say the same thing in their own different way in order to get their 2 cents in, which I somewhat get, but time efficiency is an important part of your scenario and how exactly you guys function in the scenario. And finally, you're lacking appropriate active followership by the group. And that's what we're going to get into right now. Okay. If your team or certain individuals fail to be active followers in a scenario, then they're just going to inevitably do more harm than good. How to be an active follower, you want to do two things. You want to try to help as much as you possibly can, and you don't want to try to help too much that you end up hurting your team leader or the team in general. Counterintuitive, I get it. How do we do that? 3 steps to the process. The first, I want you guys to Google the vocab word and add to your list for this week, perspicacity. It's the quality of having ready and just insight. You want your insight to be both ready and just. Emphasis on the just. But if your leader's very visibly nervous at the start, if they're frozen, they clearly have no idea what to do, that's when I want you to embody the ready. I want you to pop your hand up and help them out as much as humanly possible. Next, regarding just, the word just in that definition, if your insight is ready, but it's not just, then once again, you're just going to hurt your team lead more than you're actually going to help them. In order to make sure your insight is just, ask yourself 2 questions. First, is this idea actually going to be effective? Did you actually think it through all the way, or are you just shooting from the hip? Second, am I going to actually communicate it appropriately and articulate it effectively? If the answer is no to either questions, don't open your mouth. Stop. Don't say a word. But that's the first. Next, specifically, a lot of people make the mistake of trying to add to ideas that are already going particularly well. If somebody had a good idea and implemented a good idea, then let it. Don't try to change it. Don't try to be a devil's advocate necessarily. If something's very clearly working, sit back and let it. If somebody's very clearly helping the leader, then sit back and let them. Take a step back, taking the backseat role and taking the worker ant and the worker bee role doesn't hurt the leader that you have. It's actually, it's more helpful than not in most cases. Finally, we're going to talk about insubordination, right? When you're leading a scenario and you have that one guy that really is dead set on an idea and won't let it go, it only hurts the confidence of the leader more. So don't be an insubordinate. And the way to go about this is you have one yeah, but, and then your argument becomes a yes, sir. So if I'm talking, and shout out to Cadet Davis. If Cadet Davis is leading in a scenario and I'm one of his followers and I give him an idea that I think is going to work, he says, no, I get one, yeah, but. I say, Cadet Davis, but blah, 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 blah. I give all my reasoning, state my grievance, etc. If he disagrees with me at that point in time, I don't fight it anymore. I get straight into it, just becomes yes, sir. I don't fight him after stating my point once. It just becomes a yes, sir, I'll do whatever you want, because that's kind of the way you need to go about it, right? The leader makes the decision at the end of the day, the leader makes the active decision, and you're just helping him along the way. And once again, think of it as their form 2 in their scenario. Just do your best to actively help them. Don't hurt the individual leading. It's one of the worst things you guys can possibly do to each other. Finally, short story for you. It's about 2 pages long, but I think everybody should read it and give it a read if possible. But I was given a short story at Maxwell from a colonel, a deck commander at Embry-Riddle in Arizona, I believe, and he gave me a short story by the name of A Message to Garcia. It really embodies everything I think you guys should try to do or be doing in these GLPs and these scenarios and in life in general as a follower. Give that a read. It should take you 5 minutes. It's 2 pages long, and it is pretty awesome. Okay, continuing on with our 8-step process and what usually goes wrong with our 8-step process. Next is initiating movement. So what usually goes wrong with the initiating movement category is fits either with what goes wrong with the team or what goes wrong with the leader. What usually goes wrong with the team is the fact that they move with no urgency, they move too slow, they don't move with any guidance or any action or any description. They don't get any description of action or are given any guidance from the leader themselves. So they all take complete autonomy and completely overstep the scenario leader, and they essentially just do whatever they want, right? They act as their own units in their own bodies. This is the worst thing that can possibly happen for somebody getting form 2'd. Now, with the leader themselves, they usually miss the big picture. So they'll immerse themselves into the steps of the problem solving process instead of doing the next steps, which are conducting reconnaissance in this situation because the leader themselves is too immersed in the process and trying to solve steps of the problem instead of looking at the big picture. Nobody conducts reconnaissance. Because nobody conducts reconnaissance, nobody actually completes your plan, issues your complete plan. And once again, we already touched on it, but this is a big issue because no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Nobody's going to let you get away with just one plan throughout the course of an entire scenario. But 5 through 8 in total, including supervising and refining, 5 through 8 just never happen because your leader is too deeply involved with the nitty-gritty details instead of the big picture. So I know that 8-step process is a lot to actively be thinking about and a lot to both memorize and to do, specifically in short-term scenarios. So your 10-minute and your 15-minute projects, it's a lot to do and it's a lot to actively think about whenever you're first thrown in for your first couple, 1 or 2 GLPs. It's a lot to have in your mind. So I'm going to give you guys my mnemonic device that's substantially simpler and it'll at least get you started in these scenarios. It's a way to go off the rip, but I call it my 5 W's and it stands for who, what, who, where, when. For your first 2, these are the positions that you know you're going to assign in every GLP regardless of the context. So in any situation, you're always going to assign, you always need to have a time hack and a deputy, right? You always need that one person there tracking time, and you always need the other person there who is set in place to take over if you die. If they kill you off or they pull you out of the scenario, then you need somebody to take over in the instance at which you're no longer there. So you need both a time hack and deputy. Next, what? Read the prompt. Simple as that. You get your MTO, look for the right parts of it. You don't want to read the whole thing, but read specifically the situation and your mission. Read it out to your people so that they know what's going on. Next, who, the second who, delegate and assign scenario specific roles. So if I want a intelligence team, if I want a logistics team, if I want a command team, I assign leaders for each group. And one of the things I always like to do is I like to assign one person to be the subject matter expert or your SME on the prompt, right? So while you're working on making sure everybody else is starting their work, and while you're managing the other groups and delegating positions, I always like to hand over the prompt to somebody else to have them deep read it for the finer details that I can't get to at that point in time. But the second who, subject specific roles, delegate and get people working. Start them off the rip. Tell them get out papers, assign roles in your group. Have somebody be writing. Somebody's going to be your scribe in each group, and next you're going to get into the where. So isolate each individual group. If everybody's running around and everybody's standing up in one big gaggle and each group doesn't have a specific location, then what exactly are they going to do in each group? It's unorganized and it only hurts the leader in particular. Again, if these groups, and it only hurts overall communication if these groups aren't split up into separate places, right? Assign corners of the room if you have to, or assign and literally divide them, split them up, because if you don't, it's going to come back to bite you later. But whenever you delegate, give them a place to be. Give them what to do and a place to be. Next, when. And finally, time-specific goals. So you don't want to say, you're going to be this team lead and you're going to do this mission over here and leave it at that, because it's open-ended, and at the end of the day, they could fail to get you the information that you need within an allotted time period, and that leads to you not meeting deadlines, that leads to you rushing later on. It hurts you. So you need to set upfront goals and upfront expectations. So you're going to be in charge of this, you're going to be over here, and you're going to get back to me on whatever you're doing every 5 minutes. After every 4 minutes, you're going to take 1 minute, come to me, and you're going to explain all your progress and let me know, give me updates on how everything's happening. You need time specific goals for these situations. Otherwise, if you don't assign time specific goals and the group fails to accomplish what they need and they don't get you what you need by the time that you have to brief it to your POC, the POC in charge of you, then you're inevitably failing the scenario. Very briefly, finally, we have once again our cognitive lesson objectives in our samples of behavior. I want you to use this video as much as you can to remember the fundamentals of triple procedures and understand how to actively apply them in situations. The who, what, who, where, when is the best way you can take if you take anything from this, take that, because it's at least very easily implementable for you guys in your scenarios that you do. And once again, these weren't all my work. This was mostly made by Captain Rich. Thank you to him.